Let's firstly speak with William Yarwood, Campaign Director at the Taxpayers Alliance. William, good afternoon to you. Always good to gauge your view on these things. I mean, this one's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, the Taxpayers Alliance for years has been looking at those kind of hidden areas of public spending that are not always made that public. They're there, but nobody bothers to look. You guys have been looking for years, and up pops all manner of interesting facts and stats around how our money is spent. This is different territory, isn't it, this one? Because we've got the curious situation where 5.5 plus 6 million a day, whatever it is being spent in this one area, and it's not actually being hidden.
Yeah, completely, Ian. Thanks for having me on the show. Great to be on. And to be quite honest with you, this is money we wouldn't need to spend if our borders were secure, quite frankly. Yeah. So it all stems from that original point about the fact that we haven't, for years, both under this Labour government and indeed under the last Conservative government, managed to stop the boats, because I think many of our politicians will throw gimmicks at us like, you know, oh, we're going to have one in, one out policies, which isn't turning out to be very true at all. They'll talk about smashing the gangs, and in reality, the criminal gangs that are helping these people get over here haven't been smashed at all. And then they come up with wonderful ideas such as shoving more taxpayers' money over into the coffers of the French Treasury to try and make this situation better. And the only thing that we seem to be getting for that is, oh wait, nothing. We don't seem to be getting anything at all for it, except the French taxpayer, well, French Treasury seems to be getting more money from British taxpayers. And yeah, this is 500 grand we don't have to be spending in reality if these people weren't here in the first place. But again, Ian, this all stems from a key fact. If you do not control your borders, if you do not control illegal migration, then these costs are going to go up. And one last one for you. The National Audit Office predicts that the cost of housing illegal migrants, you know, transporting them places, the whole 9 yards is going to cost us close to £10 billion a year by the end of this decade. And I think that's a prediction from just a few years ago. I wouldn't be surprised if that figure is now estimated to be even higher. I
would bet that your bottom dollar that it will be higher. Absolutely bang on. And I sense with that, this is no longer a figure that politicians can say, well, it's because they do this a lot. They say, well, it sounds a lot of money, but actually, in the grander scheme of things, it's not a lot of money. Sorry, 10 billion plus is a lot of money. It's the entire budget of certain areas, or at least significant parts of it. They can't hide behind the fact that it's small fry.
No, they can't. I get annoyed when politicians talk about that. They talk about that in relation to public spending as well. And
they never, by the way, they never think of adding it all up, do they? Going, you know, well, that department, it's only 500,000 here and it's 2 million there and 1 billion there. If you put it all together, the figure is massive.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, they leave that kind of job to us, really, at the Taxpayers Alliance, don't they? They can't be bothered to do it themselves, and we're more than happy to do it for them, but nothing ever seems to really change in that respect. But yeah, in regards to the view on spending, most of the time they will say, oh, this is just a little bit of money here and there. And yet when it comes to tax hikes, you know, they go, oh, well, it's only a little bit of money we're going to extract from you guys. You know, we really need this money. When in reality, there's multiple things they could be doing to cut waste. And also, in regards to illegal migration bill, stopping the boat and putting this money towards frontline public services, putting it towards tax cuts. How about putting it towards defence? Everyone talks about increasing defence spending. How about they go ahead and do that instead? But again, this all stems from a key point. Politicians from both the Tories and Labour have failed the British public time and time and time again on this issue. And now that is incurring massive costs on British taxpayers. And no wonder that these people are getting rightly angered about it, because they think, hang on, why do I get up every single morning? Why do I bother going to work? Why do I bother paying taxes? And when I see my potholes not being filled, when I see transport infrastructure crumbling, when I see my public services not working properly, but oh, it's okay because illegal migrants are being ferried from hotel to hotel and from hospital appointment to hospital appointment. I'm completely with the British public on this one, and the only way to stop this is by stopping the boats detaining and deporting and sending these people back to their countries of origin. That is the only way to deal with this massive incurring bill.
It was interesting. We had Matthew Saeed in with us in the first section of the programme, William, and the reason I find people like Matthew rather fascinating on this subject is not least because he's a great talker and he's a great journalist. His columns are always great to read. You don't always agree with everything, but he's just a gifted writer. But the main reason is because He's a former Labour man. He was, member of the Labour Party back in the sort of early Blair years. And he's taken a bit of a journey, and he's now in a very different place from where he once was. To see somebody like him getting animated and writing about this stuff is always encouraging, because you can see that someone has actually sort of not exactly woken up. That sounds patronising, but he's just aware of the basic. Whether you're left wing or right wing, these are the facts. No one with a straight face could say these numbers of people coming over are acceptable. No one with a straight face can say 5-6 million quid a day on hotels is acceptable, and no one with a straight face can say a taxi bill for £500,000 quid per day to take migrants on appointments is acceptable. Everybody knows, everybody with a brain knows that. You have to wonder who the people who don't know that actually are.
Well, I think they're sitting in the Houses of Parliament and in number 10, Ian, and in the civil service. I think they're the ones who perhaps don't care about this. And yeah, I mean, you're right. This is a cross-party issue and across, ideologies as well. When you hear Labour MPs and Labour government ministers speaking, when you hear Tory shadow cabinet members and Tory backbench MPs reform, the Lib Dems, maybe not the Greens perhaps, because they don't think there is a problem. Well, they don't think border should exist, do they? But that's a different subject altogether. But nevertheless, there is cross-party consensus on getting this issue sorted. The problem is no one has any real radical solutions on how to deal with this. Now, I know that some people have proposed leaving the ECHR. That's a good first step, I think. But there's also domestic legislation at home we need to deal with in the Human Rights Act. Some of the modern slavery stuff that also has some junk in there, which basically prevents people from being deported for whatever reason. And I think the British public are tired of excuses. They're tired of coughing up money for this, and they're willing to listen to radical solutions that perhaps might not sound very nice to the average, to the average Joe, but actually in reality would deal with this solution, deal with this problem, and actually provide solutions to it over the long term. Because why is it fair for people waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning to be paying taxes only to see their infrastructure decline and then see more and more illegal migrants come over and be put up in hotels? Why is it fair on a foreign nationals in prison point? Why is it fair that a single mother working 2 jobs is paying for the bed and board of an Albanian drug dealer in a prison? It is simply not fair. The social contract in this country between the taxpayers and the state, I think, is fundamentally broken. And if Labour wanted to gain some popularity, I mean, I know they're having a bit of a Burnham bounce at the moment, but if Burnham really wanted to be super popular, he would go full to the wheel, kneel to the wheel on radical solutions to dealing with this, because if he doesn't get this under control, the public, like they didn't forgive the Conservatives, are not going to forgive him either. Let's
speak with David Spencer, former Detective Chief Inspector of the Met Police, now Head of Crime and Justice at the Policy Exchange. David, good afternoon to you, sir. Nice to have you with us. One of the reasons we wanted to speak to you, in fact, the main reason, is it ties into all of this. You've done a really interesting piece at the Policy. It's a report where you've spoken, I know you did the interviews yourself as well, to 14 former Home Secretaries. Was that a decision that was taken over a big meeting or over a pint, where somebody said, here's an idea, let's do this? It's not easy to get all that lot. I know you didn't interview them all simultaneously, but nonetheless, it's still a bit of a task.
No, that's right. And, meetings and pints they're not necessarily exclusive.
True.
They can be done together. And so, it was a little while ago we made the decision. But obviously, we're very grateful to the 14 former Home Secretaries who've given their time and their wisdom in terms of what it was like being Home Secretary and taking on that role. And it's everyone from Ken Baker back in 1990 through to James Cleverly in 2024. So it's a pretty big project that we've taken on here, and it's great to be able to publish it today.
And a lot of interesting names in between. So on those substantive issues, like immigration and where they were at the time and what they think about what's going on now, what did you manage to glean from that particular cohort? I don't know what the collective noun is for a group of Home Secretaries. I'm sure if we put that out to our listeners, it wouldn't necessarily be that kind, but you take the point. What was the kind of variance of responses on that very hot potato of an issue?
The most recent interesting point was made by Alan Johnson, who was one of the Home Secretaries under Gordon Brown. And he said that he thought that the current Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, she needed to press on with the work she was doing. Said, don't listen too much to your Labour colleagues. when you're doing something that really needs to be done, particularly on illegal immigration, you're always going to get a kickback. And so she's got to carry on. The more she listens to her backbenchers, the worse it'll be, because it's a very big issue for the public. So that was Alan Johnson, obviously a Labour Home Secretary under Gordon Brown, giving some pretty strong advice there to the current Home Secretary on immigration, Shabana Mahmood.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because he knows that, and maybe, I don't know whether Andy Burnham knows it or not, or whether he feels it in his political DNA. But of course, it's all very well saying ignore your backbenchers, but of course they can cause absolute flipping chaos for you.
Well, that's very true. We've seen that previously with this Labour, or with the previous Labour administration under Keir Starmer. So I think that's true. But ultimately, one of the other things that comes through here, so Sajid Javid, who was a Conservative Home Secretary, said to me that there's always trade-offs. There's always trade-offs in government as a minister. There's always decisions to be made between, one group, one another, one policy or another. And here I think that what Alan Johnson would say, the trade-off is between Labour backbenchers and the general public when it comes to this issue. So that's the sort of trade-off I think that the Home Secretary needs to look at.
Did you sense then that of the 14 you interviewed, that Alan Johnson was, for want of a better phrase, he was more to the right on this issue of immigration than many of the others?
No, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say he's more to the right. I think the reality is that with the benefit of no longer being in office and no longer having to deal with backbenchers, on this issue and on a whole range of issues, actually, these former Home Secretaries were very clear-sighted on what needs to be done by government and in government, and actually what the public are looking for. So I think that was really clear. And, one of the things that, so for example, Amber Rudd said to me, she said, the reality of being government is you've got to pick 2 or 3 things. You've got to pick 2 or 3 of the most important things, go after them. And she was very, very clear on that. I think one of the other things, if we go back a little way, Ken Clarke, who was obviously Home Secretary back in the 90s, he said to me, well, one of the problems is that the Home Office is a department that is resistant to change. And of course, the Home Office is the department that is principally responsible for immigration. So that was his view, having been Home Secretary back in 1992. And there'd be a lot of people ask the question whether that's any different now, 30 years later.
What about the other issues around that role of Home Secretary? Obviously, terrorism and law and order, the police, very much, in the headlines in a really big way right now, David. What gauge did you take from the responses you got from those former Home Secs?
Well, that's right. One of the things that we saw here, and particularly having the benefit of interviewing Home Secretaries over such a long time period, over sort of 35 years or so in reality, one of the things that we saw was how things have changed over that time. And in particular, one of the things that's changed when it comes to policing is actually the level of control and the level of influence that ministers are able to have on policy making with the police. So one of the things that happened that changed in the sort of 2010s under the coalition government was the introduction of the College of Policing, which I know you and many of your viewers will be familiar with, have been at the heart of things like non-crime hate incidents and chilling effect on free speech there, and also the Police Race Action Plan and the impact there on sort of without policing, without fear or favour. So the College of Policing have been central to that. And what we've seen from some of these interviews is that policy making on policing has moved away from ministers and become more and more something that chief constables do on their own through things like the National Police Chiefs Council and the College of Policing. And we say that that's a pretty troubling development. And actually, there's an opportunity for the government with their white paper that's come out recently for them to take.
And we got frozen right at the end there, David, right on that last point. But we got you back, David. Sorry, you were talking about the white paper being frozen and then you froze.
Yeah. Well, the white paper isn't quite frozen yet. I think the Home Secretary is going to be trying to keep it warm.
Yes.
But what she's planning on doing is to have greater control over some of the policing system. And one of the things that is clear is that needs to extend to policy making as well, because otherwise chief constables run away with it themselves, as they did with the College of Policing. Let's
speak with Hamish de Bretton Gordon, OBE, former British Army Colonel. Always good to get your views, Hamish, on these things. Give us your overarching response then to what Andy Burnham has said.
Oh, good afternoon, Ian. Thanks for having me on. Well, I mean, I'm very supportive of Britain giving the blueprints to Storm Shadow. This is a very effective cruise missile. I'm rather sad that we didn't give it before. I mean, we have given them a number of these missiles, but I think it sends a really important message, a psychological message, and I think that's what Andy Burnham's trying to do in Kyiv today to buoy up the Ukrainian people who feel that sometimes they are being left to fight the Russians on their own. But there's an awful lot of talk of actually that this might not be the right sort of missile that they need, and they need interceptors to knock down the ballistic missiles that Russia is firing every single day. I think what people are missing is actually it's a Storm Shadow that can destroy those missiles on the ground, and that's, I think, the really important thing. Why they actually need it, and we're coming to another pivotal time, I think, in this war.
Sure.
The Russians have got elections, sham elections coming up next month, but it's widely expected that Putin is going to have to do a general mobilization of 300,000 people. And I think a lot of people looking at this think that he may well not be able to carry on with this war if he does that, because he's exhausted all the ethnic Russians, all the prisoners. He's now going to have to get the middle classes onto the battlefield, and they certainly do not want that. So I think it's a good move. We should have done it a long time ago, and let's hope it'll encourage Trump to unlock the blueprints for the Patriot interceptor missiles, which Ukraine desperately needs to stop those ballistic missiles if we can't destroy them on the ground with Storm Shadow.
Why does Russia believe that this is almost a diplomatic incident? I mean, they haven't quite used those words. They talked about adding fuel to the fire. It should be no surprise to the Kremlin and Mr. Putin that our allegiance is with Ukraine. Why would it surprise him at all that we may well be handing over these blueprints, and America may well do the same?
Well, absolutely. But this is the game the Russians play: disinformation and propaganda. That's what we get all of the time. I think it's a realization that the war really isn't going well for Russia. Over 1.5 million casualties. I'm sure you've reported regularly on these strikes onto the Wildberries, the Amazon equivalent, onto the oil refineries. You can't even get oil. You can't even buy petrol in Moscow without queuing for half a day to get it. And you're paying a lot of money. So it's very visual to everybody. And even the Russian papers are beginning to question Putin. So they're trying to do all they can to turn this, against the West, and particularly against the UK for some reason.
This figure of 300,000, I mean, it sounds, a pretty horrific prospect. I mean, it's not as if he's not had a lot of manpower there previously. I mean, are we literally talking about, a charge here? 300,000 people, over you go, lads, over the top, as it were.
Well, that would be a massacre. That would be reprehensible, even from Putin. The issue being is that they're sending people into the front line with no training, and even to do the basic training that I did and every British soldier does takes a year or so. But these kids are given a rifle and a day and a week's training, which is why they're dying in their numbers. If, looking at it cynically with a military hat on, if these 300,000 are going to be effective, Putin's got to train them for a year, got to properly equip them. But that doesn't seem to be the role. He just wants to keep plugging the gap. He thinks that he can outlast the West, which is why this business with the Storm Shadow is a sort of long-term commitment from the UK. And that message should really resonate in the Kremlin, that actually we're in this for the long term. Not the short term. So I think Putin's 300,000. I think the intelligentsia in Russia absolutely understand this, and that is why I think messaging is so terribly important, and getting the Russian people to understand what has been done in their name. And I think they're beginning to do that. And the final thing I'd say on this, Ian, when the Russians lost 17,000 soldiers in Afghanistan in the 80s, a very good book called The Boys of Zinc was written about all the Russian boys coming back in zinc-lined coffins. And the babushkas, the mothers of Russia, marched on the Kremlin and demanded a withdrawal from Afghanistan. A lot of people think that this could be the Boys of Zinc moment for Putin, and the mothers of Russia will not accept it.
And just a final point, though, Hamish, on this, rather, the potential for something pretty grim to take place. Is your assessment that this could get worse then? I mean, we could see a new kind of direction, a more lethal direction from Russia than we've seen in the last years since this has been going on, or is this likely to be a turning point in the opposite direction? Of course, we hope for the latter, but what are your thoughts?
Well, I personally think the Russian military is reaching what it's called its culminating point. It's running out of steam. These 300,000 really underwrite that. As far as escalation goes, he is throwing every ballistic missile he can at Ukraine at the moment, which is why it's so important that they have the interceptors to stop them. A lot of them are getting through at the moment. I don't think he can escalate any further. You know, there's lots of talk that he's going to do an attack into Estonia or Lithuania, but I think he's culminating. That's why I think it's so important that the West holds its nerve. People like Andy Burnham and others commit to a long term, because you know, if after the election Putin has to mobilize these 300,000 people, I think that's the beginning of the end for him.
And just a very final point, and naturally, whenever we talk about this, many people get in touch, Hamish, and say, look, why are we even there now? What is it to do with us? What's the significance that the UK not only has to be there in political terms and support, but the huge amount of money that goes there? Just explain, if you could, in kind of layman's terms, Hamish, why it is still important that the United Kingdom remains shoulder to shoulder with Zelensky and Ukraine.
Well, I think firstly, your opening sort of sentence on this one in saying that the Russians believe it's Britain who is throwing flames on the fuel on the fire and making this worse. I mean, for some reason, the Russians see us as the main protagonist here, apart from the Ukrainians. We've been in a hybrid war with Russia for several years. People will have heard of various drone strikes. They will have heard of assassination attempts in this country, firebombing of previous prime minister's home by Russian proxies, and also a lot of leading industrialists in the defense sector in Europe being targeted by the Russians as well. That we are absolutely part of this, and this hybrid war will only intensify if Russia keeps its war going with Ukraine. I think the only way out of this is a peace deal and a ceasefire and a just peace for Ukraine. That is what everybody wants. But unfortunately, at the moment, Putin has no interest in peace, because he knows as soon as there's a peace deal, he's finished.
This troubling picture from behind bars. Yes, of course, we're familiar with all sorts of troubling stories from behind bars, but this one takes us into a different territory. New Ministry of Justice figures show that 1 in 5 Muslim prisoners in England and Wales is actually white, nearly 4 times the national rate, prompting the Shadow Justice Secretary Nick Timothy to demand an investigation into forced conversions by Muslim gangs. Let's just have a listen to an extract from a BBC interview with a former prisoner. This goes back to 2020. Have a listen.
People convicted of terror offences. Some of them were violent. Some of them was preaching an extreme idea in public places, and there's a lot of talk of the Islamic states and how they want this UK to be Islamic State run.
So how did they approach you, and what did they say?
It took about 2 days before the contact was made to me. They tried to bully you into thinking that you need some sort of help and protection and a group to be around. If you're not going to be a part of what they believe or their ideas, then it is a group attack which will occur to the person.
Let's go to work with David Shipley, investigative journalist and former prisoner himself, so can shine some light from the inside as well as out on this. David, good afternoon to you. This is not an entirely new story, as we know. I mean, you know, gang-related conversion or bringing people on side or getting people into your group is not unusual in prison, and if people use religion to facilitate it, I can imagine that's another strand to the same thinking. Or is it literally about a theological position? We want more Muslims, we want more Islam. What's going on here?
I think the honest answer is it's a bit of both. So there absolutely is theological religious conversion going on, where some particularly devout Muslims in prison are determined to bring more men into the Ummah. There's also a lot of practicality. One of the features of being a Muslim in prison, whatever your crime is, you're protected. So a good example of this is sex offenders. So sex offenders who are white and Christian or Jewish or Sikh will not be protected by their co-ethnics or their co-religionists. But Muslims who are sex offenders will be. And that's because you are seen as first and foremost a Muslim, whatever your crime is. So there's a huge protective benefit in joining the Muslim community in prison, which I think is part of it as well. And there's the terrorism, the jihadism stuff. There's Jonathan Hall, KC, wrote an incredibly detailed report about all of this in 2022, talking about all the radicalization that goes on in prisons, a situation where, in many cases, prison management sort of allowed what they call wing emirs to run the wings on behalf of the staff, a very dangerous abdication of duty. So it's sort of a combination of religion, practicality, and yes, some sort of terrorist ideologies as well.
Has it, I mean, looking at these Ministry of Justice figures showing 1 in 5 Muslim prisoners is white, I mean, that would suggest that there is something much bigger than 1 or 2 people converting going on.
Yeah, it does seem high. And certainly when I was in prison, what I saw was, generally speaking, it was much likely to be black men who would convert to Islam, the white Englishmen. So that, I think, is very surprising. And I don't think we have historic data. It'd be very interesting to see how quickly that's gone up. But it may well indicate the fact that in some jails, really, the only gang is the Muslim community, and they're very powerful. So it could well be that people are feeling coerced into converting or pretending to convert to Islam for that reason.
It's kind of, I mean, if it's a case, as we discussed at the beginning, David, of people who have a more jihadist interpretation of their own faith of Islam, then that's one thing, and you can see why they might want to convert people into that thinking. But if it's just a case of using it as a sort of utensil to facilitate a wider gang and dominance and all the rest of it, I always find that bizarre. I don't know what your experience was in this field, but the idea that prisoners take a sort of moral, in this case, an ecclesiastical high ground, has always seemed to be a really odd place to do it. When you're banged up for violent offences, the idea that you're going to go all religious on people and start a recruitment drive seems a bit bizarre.
Yeah, I would say that Islam is quite distinct from Christianity, and the Christianity, of course, has a doctrine of, rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, whereas Islam has always been a totalizing civilizational model and religion. So it's perhaps not surprising that a gang would be structured using the dictates of Islam as well, because it's always being constructed in a way to manage the whole of society. And actually, it's also quite common that men in prison will find solace in faith. I think, if you're grappling with guilt at having done something terrible, if you're grappling with guilt at having messed your life up, religion can be a great comfort. So that's not actually that surprising.
The most famous case I can think of is Richard Reed, the shoe bomber, of course. I think I'm right in saying, David, that his conversion to Islam happened in jail. And we lost David Shipley on that very profound point. But we might have him back, because someone has taken a spanner to the gubbins.
I think I'm still here. So
we've got you back, David. Yes, I was just talking about Richard Reed, known as the shoe bomber, of course, who I believe was converted on the inside as well.
Yeah, I'm not aware of when he converted, but again, it's quite common that people who lost everything can be quite vulnerable to radicalisation. That's the thing. If you've lost your family and your friends and your social status, and some people come along and say, "Hey, we're going to be your friends. We're going to keep you safe. We want you to do some things for us." It's people in that situation are very vulnerable.
I think so. It's the same mentality of joining a cult, isn't it? If people do something, they do something almost deliberately, sometimes deliberately mischievous or rebellious, as it would seem. If anything's going to upset my Christian church-going nana, then it's me becoming a Muslim. So I'll do it, and there's a bit of that going on. But there's also that kind of search for belonging, and of course, if a group of people embrace you, human psychology reacts very favourably to that.
Yeah, of course. And it's not just Muslim groups. There were wings that I was on in prison that were essentially controlled by organised crime groups. And of course, in a situation of vulnerability where you've lost your normal social ties, you're in prison with thousands of strange men, many of whom might be quite dangerous. A group which is going to make you feel safe is, of course, appealing.
Just while you're with us, David, a word, if you would, on this new Talk exclusive that comes out in its fullness this afternoon at 5 o'clock. The facilitation of numerous thousands over the years of men crossing the Channel. Our reporter on this was Christian, who we've spoken to many times before, of course, because of his work in this area. But just some extraordinary stories coming from this. Again, the idea that it takes a journalist. I think the exposure of people traffickers, the small occasions they've been exposed, has happened because of journalists. And now we've got this that has happened because of journalists. I thought we had like MI6 and stuff for stuff like this, but apparently not. It still takes a journalist sometimes.
Yeah, and I've got to say I'm incredibly jealous of Christian doing this and incredibly impressed by him. I think it's a stupendous piece of work. And he's revealed some really fascinating details that we hadn't encountered before. Of course, we know these men are crossing the Channel, but he identified details like the fact that the organisers of the illegal migration will radio to the French to get picked up off the boat and taken back to France.
Yep.
You know, there's obviously this high level of collaboration between both the French authorities and British authorities. Of course, Border Force come along and bring all these guys ashore. And I think in lots of ways, I suspect the French and British state don't really want the public to know the details, because the details are frankly radicalised.
The one thing that doesn't ever leave the news agenda, of course, is that of immigration. And I was just pondering all of this again this morning and looking at again, the headlines and this story about publishing data on criminality, which the government seem more than resistant to publish, which is just horrendous, frankly. Whatever the data says, it's horrendous. Whatever way you look at it, as I just mentioned, it's horrendous. And I was looking at the boats, and I was looking at the documentary that everybody would have seen on Talk. And if you haven't seen it, by the way, go onto YouTube, check it out. It's extraordinary what happens when a British journalist put himself on a boat, on one of the boats, came across the Channel. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It's actually there, and you can scan that QR code now that's on your screen, and it'll take you straight to where all of that is, the info, the documentary, and everything you need to know. But so all of that, Chloe, nothing, it just got me thinking, where does this story go? Where does this story end?
Well, that's a $1 million question.
Yeah.
It will keep on going until the boats are stopped and the government actually faces up to the truth and stops gaslighting us. I think people are absolutely sick of it. You mentioned, Ian, the booklet that went out telling migrants how not to rape women and children and how not to cut off, young girls as bits. I mean, it's just unbelievable that we've got to tell people that. That was an obvious admission from the government that these people cause a threat to the people in this country, yet they still can't admit it when politicians have been asked about that booklet on the media rounds in the recent days. They just can't bring themselves to say, yes, people from third world countries come with different attitudes to women and they pose a greater threat. I saw Jess Phillips on the airwaves insisting, we've just put this out because all men need guidance and advice on how to treat women. Just like how after when she nearly lost her election to one of these pro-Gaza independents, and she was being heckled and shouted at pretty rudely by Muslim men. She was then asked about that on the airwaves, and she just couldn't say it. She said, no, it was just because they were men. All men are like this. It's got nothing at all to do with their faith or their culture. They just can't admit it. And then on these migrant crime stats that we are absolutely begging to see, the Centre for Migration Control, they put in this FOI request a year ago, and they're still battling and now they're going to have to go to court over this, right? The excuse that the Ministry of Justice gave whilst David Lammy was in charge, the excuse that they gave for not publishing this data was because, it will take too long, too much time and too much money to put the facts together. And then the watchdog said, no, that's nonsense. You need to put out this data. And suddenly now they have the time and the money to challenge this and take it to the courts, which kind of, defeats their own argument. And why would you do that? Why would you appeal it? Rather, it will be less effort to just put the data out than it would be to go through this whole process of appealing it and trying to cover it up. Why would you do that unless you had something to hide? There have been other countries in Europe, like Germany, for example, Italy, I think, and some others, who have put out the data linking crimes to nationality, and it's shown a pretty shocking picture. We're probably going to have the exact same thing in the UK if we get that data. They don't seem to want us to see it.
I'm really surprised they put that leaflet out, by the way. But there's two reasons. Obviously, because it sort of goes against the whole kind of what Jess Phillips seemed to have her own wild interpretation of why it was there, understanding behaviours and expectations in the UK, a guide. I mean, goodness me. But somebody around the table might have suggested when this idea came up, maybe we shouldn't put this out because it's an admission. It's an admission of something, and it will create merry hell. And it's not only created merry hell, it's given people like us, Chloe, not that we didn't have a green light to talk about this before, but there was always that sense that someone was going to attack you based on a sort of an invented right-wing belief about certain cultures or groups. And, of course, we would resist that and argue against it. Once the government published that leaflet, all bets were off in that respect. Here we have the evidence that the government feels that the situation is so serious that they need to commit to a leaflet information about not raping people. I don't think in our lifetimes we've ever seen anything distributed by a government in that kind of way.
No, I mean, yeah, Jess Phillips is making this out as if this is just what, you know, the normal stuff that you'd see given out to boys in a sex ed class in sick form would be. It's just something that every normal guy will need to see. But the reality is, even if they won't admit explicitly why they've had to put this document out, we all know the real reason. And so implicitly, they have proved us right. Us, you know, so-called conspiracy theorists who come up with all these, you know, far-right loony ideas that people who come from countries where women are treated like second-class citizens might bring those attitudes with them. Oh no, everybody who's coming to this country is you know, someone who's running away from those terrible ideas. They've just proven that we're right. And I think that maybe they put this out thinking, well, we need to do something to stop people complaining about the chaos being caused by migrants in this country without admitting it. Maybe if we put out this booklet that the rapes and the criminality will stop and everyone will be quite happy having these migrants in their villages and everything will be hunky-dory. I mean, the idea that a leaflet is going to solve these problems, I believe it's I think the stat I heard was 37% of the migrants coming across are actually literate. So even if they publish it in various different languages, only 37% of them will actually be able to read it anyway. So I'm not sure how much of an impact it's going to have.
Indeed. Let's look at another aspect of this. We mentioned this yesterday, but it's now gained some real traction. The documentary, of course. Documentary of the century that dropped at 5 o'clock yesterday on TalkTV's YouTube channel last night, highlighting how undercover reporter Christian Drogan infiltrated the Channel crossing route. He posed as a British criminal on the run in order to board the dinghy. And the footage that he's got from this is quite extraordinary. Filmed alongside our own Isabel Oakeshott, shows him identifying smugglers without a shadow of a doubt. Yet the police let the smugglers go. They let them off the boat and took them back to the shore, offered them a lift back to the camp. Let's have a little look at a snippet.
The gendarme boat appeared.
Relax, 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 relax. Relax, relax.
The police boat took control of our boat, so it put its bow on our bow and it turned us round in a circle. While they were talking to us, they said, "Don't go ahead, it's dangerous out there, it's very wavy."
This is very rough. Here it's quiet. When you go wider, it's really dangerous. The sea is very rough. Okay, the best way today is to go back.
So the police had said that to us, you know, if anybody else wants to get off, get on our boat and we'll take you back. 4 smugglers, get on the gendarme boat, check for weapons, all okay, sit on the back, we'll take you back. The police, the gendarme, took the smugglers back to the shore.
I mean, just when you think the story can't get any more unbelievable, that happens.
Yeah, I was absolutely gobsmacked, and hats off to Christian Drogan for going and doing that, because that's a pretty terrifying thing to go and do. He was very much putting his life in danger to reveal the truth for us there. So brilliant exclusive that Isabel Oakeshott and him pulled off.
Yep.
I think there were a couple of things that were really shocking from that I think a lot of us hadn't realised before. First of all, what we've just looked at. We found it shocking enough when Chris Philp filmed the gendarme saying our policy that we're instructed just to let them go, just to stand by and not to intervene. That was shocking enough. But then to see they're not just standing by and turning a blind eye, but it seems like actively helping the people smugglers. You know, the point Christian made is there's no way that anyone who's paid to get on one of these boats, there's no way that they would get off the boat after all the turmoil and all the waiting in Calais in these camps and walking around for miles and miles to get on them. No one's going to get off except for the people smugglers. Surely the French police know that, and when they're pulling those people off saying, does anyone want to get off because it's rough weather, surely they know who it is, and surely it's the same people every time, right? Yeah. Because these smugglers, they're just dropping them back off at the beach and they're coming again. So this to me seems like the police are complicit and helping these people, and so it just makes it seem absolutely insane that we are handing them another penny of any of our money. And then the other thing that was quite telling from this, that I think a lot of people didn't realise, was that he said that most of the people going on the boat with him were people who actually have not paid yet for their journey. Most people now are not paying up front, but are agreeing to pay for it by engaging in criminal activity, criminal work once they get to the UK, right? So we're constantly told by the lefties, oh, the chances of anyone coming over that's actually a criminal is really, really slim. But actually, even if they get on the boat not a criminal, once they get to the UK, they're going to become criminals because they need to work in criminal gangs, dealing drugs and whatnot, not exactly paying into the tax system and making our society better and safer, doing quite the opposite. They're coming to the UK and being forced to work as criminals once they get here. We don't want that happening. Why on earth are we allowing this? Mass immigration. Where does the story end?
That's the question, Ian. So for me, speaking to people in places like Piddington, in Glasgow, in Crowborough, and all of these places across the UK, all I can say to answer the last caller you had on around the government, lies, lies, lies. That's all they're doing. It's a cover-up. Mm-hmm. They are covering up the numbers. They are covering up the rapes. They are covering up the attacks. People are terrified in every city and every town across this country. In Glasgow, in the last 4 years, there has been a 33% increase, 33% increase in rapes. Now, that coincides very nicely with the influx of illegal migrants into Glasgow because it's a city of sanctuary. Now, you don't hear that. The government don't say that. As far as they're concerned, everything's great in Glasgow. So they're covering up what is happening every solitary day in this country. And people, Ian, are seeing through it.
And there is data, of course. The data yes. They won't release. They
won't release it because they can't release it. If they release it, it would be the next rape gang scandal. Look what they did with the rape gang scandal. That's been covered up for decades. And every time somebody tried to expose it, and that, you know, there's been many people that have tried to do that over the last 2 decades. It's been shut down and they've been demonised. This is the next rape gang scandal. We will find out as the months and years pass how horrendous this problem has been, particularly for women and girls.
And it doesn't matter, you know, when we hear the argument, well, you know, it's only a small percentage of people on a boat that will that have criminal intent or nefarious desires, to put it mildly. Sure, I'm willing to believe that, but to be honest, a small percentage is also quite a lot of people out of 200,000 people that have arrived just on the boat route over the last X amount of years. So there's that, and there's also the fact that why would we import anybody? Well, we often hear the argument from the left, don't we? Well, what about the sort of Jess Phillips argument? There's plenty of blokes in the UK that do terrible things to women.
There are.
They are. Yeah, but why do we want to import more then?
Correct. And the thing is, that argument is so futile because they'll say, oh, there's, of course, white men, British men, blah, 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 do this. Of course they do. But in the last 20 years, the statistics, there's been an 800% increase, which coincides with the invasion of illegal migrants. Now, the amount of times I have discussions with the left when they say they're asylum seekers, they're not asylum seekers. Most are economic migrants, and a lot of them, and I hate to say it, are sex tourists. That's what they're coming for. I've seen videos, I'm sure you've seen videos of these men saying why they want to come here. It's an absolute disgrace. The government are literally importing rapists into the country. It's a crime against humanity, Ian, and I just don't know, to answer your original question, where this is going to end. But it's not going to end well for us or for the government or for the illegal migrants, because it just can't continue. Yeah. And this asylum seeker nonsense, there are men who are going to start making their way from Morocco. I've got a friend of mine who's in Morocco on holiday. Why are they're only coming here for two reasons: to claim benefits or to prey on young British white girls. And these are the facts, Ian. When the government start being direct and honest with the public, then maybe we can try and work out how we deal with this problem. But all you've got is people like Shabana Mahmood saying, oh, villages and towns across the country must take their share. No, we don't. We don't have to do anything. We are the British people, we are the British taxpayers, and we are refusing to take any more. Simple.
Yeah, that was a right old clanger the other day, wasn't they, when they started using... Everyone's got to take their share. Burnham said it, she said it as well. Everybody's got to take their share, as if we were all part of some kind of charitable benevolence, like it was some sort of post-war evacuee program.
Exactly that. You know, in 1942, 1943... parents put their children on trains and sent them to Devon and Cornwall and Wales to protect them. Where are we supposed to send our children? Because there is not a place in this country that is safe, because they are everywhere. So if we were saying everyone needs to take their share of young British children because we are in the middle of a war, that's very different. But to say everybody needs to take their share of multiple amounts of alien men from alien cultures because we can't control our borders and we haven't got the balls to sort this problem out, I don't think so. Yeah. You know, everybody that I speak to is at their wits' end. I spoke to someone in Piddington this morning. They have got, you know, they're waiting for this invasion of 1,300 men in a tiny village. Why should that be put on them, Ian? In what way is that fair that these people's lives are going to be destroyed? It is absolutely outrageous, and it is getting worse, and the government do not want to give the figures because they are scared there will be mass uprising. That's what it's about.
Question we began with on this debate, because so often when we discuss immigration, there's a thousand tangents and tentacles to this. But the overarching question really was, where does the story end? You know, we talk every day about the boats, we talk about the hotels, we talk about the eye-watering, jaw-dropping amount of money involved in all of this. Are we going to be talking about this in 10 years' time?
Probably, yeah. But well, unless we're in government. But I think, I think actually might have repercussions. But I think the fundamental question the country is asking itself is our immigration policy making us safer or less safe? And what is the percentage of people that think it's making us less safe? And you know, if the government feels it's making us less safe, then they have to take actions to stop it. We have had enormous levels of immigration into Britain, and the problem is, Ian, is that they're hiding the data, right? They're not even telling us what crime is attributed to migrants. So that's how they're hiding the repercussion. And I say the public's entitled to know what impact that has had on crime, but they won't tell us.
It's utterly bizarre, isn't it, that this data, and I think David Lammy was the sort of first out the traps to try and bury this data when he was Justice Secretary. And the Information Commissioner has said that it should be released. And of course, there's two options, or there's two potential outcomes. One is that there's nothing to see here, and there is no damning data that's going to show disproportionality or any need for alarm. Yeah. And if that is the case, then release it. If that isn't the case, and there is some disturbing data in there, then surely it's the government's duty to release it.
I mean, you cannot have a sensible immigration policy while refusing to examine its consequences. Right, so I would ask the government, do migrants commit crime at the same rate as British citizens? Is it at a lower rate, at a higher rate? And are there particular offences or nationalities where there is a serious overrepresentation? I mean, you and I know the question. I have prosecuted a lot of people who've arrived on boats in London, and they are overrepresented. You know, and this isn't about saying every migrant is a criminal, of course, because the left are going to go up in arms. Obviously, they aren't. but it's asking whether whether we're importing additional crime into Britain, what kind of crime and at what scale.
Well, that's also relevant, isn't it?
What are they hiding?
Indeed, and I would also argue, and I say this without qualification, but I think I'm onto something, that if if an individual comes on they've escaped a tyrannical regime and they're on their Todd and they're on a boat and they arrive somewhere and they're the only fella in the town that's, come over from Eritrea or wherever, that's a whole different proposition for migration policy than putting 800 men in one place. I think that in itself has a potential catastrophic compounding effect on possible criminality. That's got to be if you put 800 blokes of any colour or background anywhere who've got nothing to do, they don't work, they can't speak the language, then something's going to happen, right? In whatever form it takes.
I mean, the devil makes work for idle hands. They're just going to be sitting around, and then you compound. You on top of all that, they're giving. They obviously know. The government obviously knows that these migrants present a massive risk to women and girls because of the leaflets we saw last week, telling them that you can't rape women and you can't have sex with children. And it's remarkable that they see that, they know the risk, and they're like, you know what? Just going to take the risk on the chin, and we're going to put 300 of those potential rapists in a town all together and just kind of pretend nothing's happened. It is remarkable.
Yeah, it is remarkable. Is it only a reform government that will do something about this?
Well, I mean, listen, this has been growing, and in my opinion, we didn't create this issue. We're offering a solution. The Conservatives created the problem. Labour are compounding it and expanding it. Trust the people who have nothing to do with it. Trust the party that has always been consistent in sovereignty, removing us from the ECHR, detain and deport illegal migrants. We were never wishy-washy about it.
Would you say in that, we just had Orla Minahane on, I don't know if you're familiar with Orla's work, but she's a Restore Britain member, so there's always been this, there has been certainly of late this sort of debate about whether you guys have got much more in common than you have differences, and I think a lot of people listening to this would say that you and her probably sing from a very similar hymn sheet on this one.
Well, of course, and I'm sure, but me and many... hundreds of thousands of women across the country. I mean, if I was living in Piddington or Crowborough, not only would I'm furious now, but I'd be furious and I'd be scared and I'd be in my small town. And I'm sure Orla and many people who support Restore and many people across the country feel the same way. I don't think it's a left or right issue. I think it's, number one, a national security issue. We know that some that are coming over are part of IRGC. But we also now know, which we've always kind of known, that some of them are rapists and actually think it's fine to rape children because the government has basically admitted it by issuing those leaflets.
Yeah, the leaflet was it's extraordinary.
What woman in their right mind, whether you're a Labour supporter or not, sees that, looks at the boats and says, you know what, I want more of that.
But who wants to live next door to...
Right next to me. Who says that?
Well, yeah, who wants to live next door to somebody who's just been given a leaflet telling them how not to rape someone? I mean...
Or don't have sex with children.
This is just... It's in another stratosphere on migration, which is almost as important.
Yeah, if you don't mind me making two comments, please, Ian.
Yeah.
One's on migration, one's on power. The first one is that how have we got into a position where this and the previous government were far more scared about the world view of us being nice to people and the ambulance chasing lawyers direct, and so scared of those that they have little or no regard for the rapes, sexual assaults and murders almost every day.
Yeah, I mean, you think that's what's going on here?
Yeah, because so the reason why they don't do internment, which is really what they should do, is because of the ambulance chasing lawyers. And the reason why they scrapped the "you will never gain citizenship in this country" is because, we don't need to look like Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably all of those things, right? All at play. The other reason they wouldn't do internment, of course, is because they wouldn't have places to put anyone.
There are plenty of islands in Scotland, and there's...
Oh, if you did it that way, rather than sort of prisons, if you actually said, right, like, as they did in Australia, you actually create an entire base for this sole purpose. You're absolutely right.
Shipping containers, bunk beds, this, that and the other. Yeah. The UNHCR uses tents. If you go to Syria and all of these other places, migrants basically get stuck in a tent. You know, they don't get a 3-star hotel and hot and cold running maid.
What is, I mean, the bits that are unfathomable about this is I don't know in what world you would, you know, in most countries, if you and I tried to get into, if you try to turn up in Germany tomorrow without a passport, you'd be in jail by 6 o'clock.
Yeah, and then...
Or you'd be on a boat straight back, one of the two.
Yeah.
So how you get... The bit I can't fathom, I know this is like going over the most obvious ground, is how you end up arriving in Dover and within a matter of hours, and it is a matter of hours, you are sitting in a Holiday Inn in Gravesend or wherever it might be, and you have the complete liberty to move around and go to the pub if you want. I mean,
yeah.
that to me is just more than bizarre.
Yeah, I like how the chap who came across on the boat, but when he stood up and went, ta-da, I'm English, and they gave the lift to the 4 people smugglers back to France, but never mind. He said, ta-da, I'm English, and they didn't know what to do with it. They didn't know to pat him on the back, arrest him for breaking into the country. And
Can you get done for breaking into your own country?
Yeah. The other comment I'd like to make is over the rise in energy. Right, OK, so you can Google this yourself. Hungary has a very similar intermix of energy resources that we do. So they use some nuclear, a fair proportion of gas, and some solar. They pay 10p per kilowatt hour domestic, 7p per kilowatt hour commercial. They have no standing charge. We pay 26p per kilowatt hour. And £220 a year standing charge. So £220 a year before you even turn the light on. So between that and the gas and electric, that's £300 bill for no energy supplied.
Right.
And so why is it 2.5 times dearer than Hungary if Hungary is still beholden to the same world gas price?
So they've got the same, all the same restraints and challenges that we've got.
Yeah, so they're buying the gas on the world market.
So the same price then?
Yeah, and I keep hearing this utter twaddle that it's because, we haven't got enough renewables, which actually means way more interconnectors, which is why we're actually having to redo the grid up when you've got small modular nuclear reactors for wanting to connect to rather than 50 interconnectors around a solar farm.
Yep.
And it's obscene and it's virtue signalling. The whole thing regarding migration and energy is pure virtue signalling.
There are Britons among hundreds feared dead after those devastating floods in Nepal. We know that rescuers are searching for survivors after torrential rains, which triggered all manner of horrendous weather problems, flash floods, landslides as well. And as I say, those Britons that are missing, we still await to get details on. Let's get a word with Dr. Basanta Raj Adhikari, who's director at the Centre for Disaster Studies at Tribhuvan University in Nepal. Dr. Basanta, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure, sir. Nice to have you with us. I mean, these are very, very disturbing circumstances to talk, but just explain, if you could, this story, which appeared to, like so many news stories, we heard a little bit about it, then a little bit more, and then suddenly we are seeing these images. When did this all begin? What precisely happened, and was it expected?
So the event was actually occurred around 8:30 a.m. yesterday of Nepal time, and the huge mass of ice, rock, and snow avalanche occurred, and it blocked the river temporarily, and then it breached. And around 9 a.m. Morning time, that flood reached to the border town between Nepal and China, And then if you see some of the video footages, the velocity and the magnitude of the flood is so enormous. And it was not expected. It was very unprecedented. And in my research career in the recent history in the Himalayan hazard, the flood or the hazard created by ice avalanche in that region is one of the largest.
So this isn't whilst the area has experienced very similar issues. This was not. There was nothing in the geological maps or meteorological maps that could have predicted this.
Yeah, I mean, some kind of similar event occurred in this region. Like last year, this valley also received or experienced similar kind of event. But this is very, very much bigger than that last year and other events in the Himalayas. So this is very unique and unprecedented.
We are hearing of a potential second wave. What can you tell us about that?
Yes. When I saw the recent video drone footages posted by our Chinese colleagues or Chinese media, so there is a water ponding, or there are at least two water ponding areas. This could or this might breach in days to come, maybe tomorrow or after a week, we don't know. But that will create a devastation. But one thing is quite clear that the second or third wave of this flood will not be devastating like this first event.
Let's look at the situation then, if we could, Doctor, in terms of where this rescue operation is right now. There are certainly, I think, about 1,300 people missing. Clearly, some people would not have survived this. We know that as well. What is the situation in terms of numbers and that rescue operation?
The rescue operation is really difficult because the government was not prepared, because most of if you see the flood, some of the videos that you are now displaying now, so most of the villages along the river corridor were washed away and many people were buried beneath the mud and debris. So the rescue is really challenging. Most of the roads were washed away. So the government used the army helicopter and private helicopters to reach there. And so rescue is really difficult, but the government of Nepal is really trying their hard to go there to find the live bodies and then the relief operations and to do the rapid visual damage assessment. So it is difficult, but the government is trying their best.
And this will be a battle of time to some degree. I mean, we've seen for ourselves, looking at the images, they are, I mean, these things, it's so disturbing to see this happen. And it would be, without wishing to sound defeatist, it would be extraordinary if ever anyone could survive some of that. It is clearly greater than the will or the power of mankind to battle or survive some of these events.
Yeah, I mean, you are absolutely right, because in my own experiences, none of any countries in the world is prepared for such kind of devastation. And if you look on these other events in around the globe in Andes, Rockies or Appalachian or other mountains, this is one of the largest events. So the governments are not prepared for that because we are not paying much more attention on the preparedness. We are more focusing on the, the rescue and relief operations. So that's why we should work on the preparedness to understand or monitor the events so that we could at least save the life of the people, though we couldn't save or we cannot save the infrastructure, critical infrastructure downstream.
Indeed. There might be some new news for you. Ryan Shorthouse is with us, founder and chair of Bright Light, the independent think tank promoting liberal conservatism. Good to see you, Ryan.
Good to see you.
I mean, look, taxes, schmaxes and all the rest of it. Nobody likes a tax. It's like, I think I'm right in saying years ago when income tax came in, wasn't it like a temporary thing or something? Was it meant to be there for like a year back in 1302? And then suddenly it miraculously stayed.
Well, we do need some taxes, obviously, to fund
indeed.
public services. So the question is where those taxes should be. So I'm not from IPPR, which is the think tank that's proposed raising national insurance for those earning over 50 grand who are above the state pension age. But some context. So the first is that the state is expanding. There's more demands on the state. A large part of that is due to ageing-related expenditure, so pensions and health. So the IPPR rightly say that about 4/5 of the increase in fiscal costs are going to be down to age-related expenditure, ageing. So any serious party that really wants to cut the net public sector debt, which is now approaching nearly 100% of GDP, need to do something seriously about cutting pensions or healthcare costs. And this ever-expanding state is being paid for by a narrower group of people. For two reasons. One is the personal tax allowance has gone up over the last 15 years, and also people on higher incomes have been brought into those higher tax bands because of fiscal drag and because they brought the higher rate of tax, the additional rate of tax, down from 140 to 125k. So we are putting a huge amount of burden on the most highly productive working people to pay for an ever-expanding state. I do not think that that is sustainable or fair. A lot of people say, for example, the additional rate of tax is 45p. Well, it ain't. It's you add national insurance on top of that, employees' national insurance, it's actually 47%. If you then add employers' national insurance, the effective tax rate of somebody earning that much is over 52%. So over half of their work, the income from their work, goes to the tax man.
And at that stage, you've surrendered your right to any, like, not paying tax before 12,750.
Yeah, and you don't get the
all that
30 hours of tax-free childcare.
All of that disappears. So it's this narrow group that is almost funding the entire system, right? I mean,
increasingly so.
And the argument, I suppose, has always been, well, who else do we go to?
Well, you know, there's an argument that we had the age of austerity in the 2010s, but actually the changes the Conservative and coalition government made the tax system more progressive, i.e. higher earners paying more. The second context, really, is that the Labour government said we're not going to raise national insurance, VAT or income tax. So what they can do instead of raising the rates is broaden the base of those taxes. So that's why IPPR are saying let's increase national insurance on people above state pension age, because that's technically not breaking the manifesto. And you know, it should be said that you can still claim your state pension as well as working. So even if you put the national insurance on their earnings, they'd still be able to access the state pension age. At the moment, they don't pay any national insurance other than the employer who pays employers' national insurance on people above the state pension age.
When I looked at the numbers in this IPPR report, I could see the notion there, I could see what they were talking about. It didn't seem to suggest it would raise an awful lot of money in the grander scale. And right there, I thought, well, would any government even pursue this? I mean, OK, every little helps and all the rest of it, but if you're talking about, if you taxed pensioners who are earning anything above 12,750 and you put that little 2% surcharge on, then you'd get about 2 billion quid. So, OK, 2 billion quid, again, it wouldn't run anywhere near a whole department of anything, but it would help. However, this is talking about a 2% surcharge to be applied on incomes over 50,000. Now, there can't be loads of those pensioners out there.
No, I mean, you're right as well, which is there's political pain, i.e. in targeting pensioners. So what I think you need to be doing is broadening the base of taxes and not just targeting particular groups. So where Labour have gone wrong is say, you know, we're going to raise VAT on private school fees, for example, and it looks like you're just attacking those parents, when actually nearly 50% of all goods and services in the UK do not have VAT applied to them. And equally, national insurance doesn't apply to pension income, it doesn't apply to rental income. So I would rather have a system where we broaden the base of a lot of these taxes And it could be the case that we could reduce the rate. So instead of having exemptions for special interests, we have a simpler tax system, which is fairer for everybody. But what I would say about the IPPR's proposal, I think a better thing to do would follow what Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak started, which is they began to reduce national insurance. And national insurance is squarely a tax on work, OK? So people are double taxed if they work. They get their income tax and then their national insurance. That doesn't apply to landlords, it doesn't apply to pensioners. I would rather abolish employers' national insurance altogether and gradually phase down employees' national insurance and compensate by increasing income tax. And then that income tax will then apply to workers, pensioners, people who derive income from rent. And so it would be a fairer system by doing that. So that would be the approach that I would take. Unfortunately, Labour are not going to take that approach because they've said they won't raise income tax. So that's why IPPR is saying we'll broaden the base by applying national insurance.
I mean, they really back themselves in a corner. It was a stupid thing to say we're not going to raise tax. I mean, OK, great, as a punter, you go, that's brilliant, we're not going to raise my taxes. Then you have to take a step back and go, well, actually, we've got to run this country. And, you know, the idea that you would, for an entire parliament, decide that you are going to curtail your ability to raise money by overtly announcing there'll be no rise on any form of the basic three basic rates of tax.
Yeah, I think they hemmed themselves in unnecessarily. I mean, I can see why they did it. They had fears of 1992 where, you know, they thought they were going to win the election and then there was this sort of tax bombshell posters. I was only 7 at the time, but, you know, it's very ingrained in people's minds. But at the end of the day, I think people were so angry with the Tories that Labour didn't need to restrict themselves so much. But to be honest, I think it's right to have principles for how you're going to approach tax. And the right principle is, let's reduce the tax burden on work and increase it on income from assets. My view is that's the right approach because I don't think you should overly tax effort, enterprise, entrepreneurialism. These are the things that drive growth, drive ambition. I want to lower taxes on those things. And I think that should have been the principle that they put in their manifesto.
I make this point often, and you're right. The idea that you just tax somebody because they've been successful is quite obscene, really. And I often tell the story of, you know, where I live in Sevenoaks. There's some, you know, really tasty houses around that neck of the wood. I'm forever bumping into some pensioner. I don't know why Alicia, our producer, just looked at me as if I've just shot her dog or something. What's wrong? No, not tasty as in edible, although some of them might be. There's some really tasty houses. And I'm always bumping into some old fella who's clearly long retired, and there he is in his nice comfy chinos and his very loose sweatshirt mowing the garden of his £3 million house. And I, you know, morning, and I find out he's lived there since 1952, which, a brief calculation, I do it every time, means he bought the house for about £35 back then. And he's doing all right. Now, there is a school of thought, go after him, Chino boy, with his lawnmower. But why should you? I mean, he bought his house, he's paid his taxes, he's worked all his life. It's an easy target, isn't it, to go after a pensioner who's got a few quid?
Well, like I said at the beginning, we need to tax somebody. So the
lawnmower tax or Chino tax. There you go.
The government does need to make difficult decisions. And at the moment, the decision is, let's tax people in their 40s and 50s, often with children, a huge amount of money. They're already stressed because they're trying to raise young children and all the costs involved in that. They often have mortgages. And we are placing the tax burden on them. We've decided to do that. I don't see why that necessarily is fair. And you talk about the guy who's, you know, lived in that house for ages now mowing the lawn. Now, he has worked very hard and that should be applauded and celebrated. He hasn't necessarily worked hard for the gains in his property value.
True.
And the baby boomer generation have been very, on the whole, have been very lucky with the house price gains. The equity in their house has massively increased. And that's largely, I'm afraid, down to luck. Not solely, but largely down to luck. I would rather I would rather reduce the tax on people who are sweating, working hard for their children, rather than income that's derived from luck. So that's why, along with Adam Smith, the philosopher, I agree with taxing inheritance, because there is lots of evidence to suggest that people who inherit lots of money, and this is a stereotype, actually it reduces their propensity to work hard, set up businesses, that sort of thing. I want to reward people and reduce the tax on people who are, you know, day in, day out, working very hard, rather than the people who just get money through sheer luck.
I get that. Just to go back to Lawnmower Boy, as we shall now refer to him, I mean, yeah, if his kids inherit the house, they're never going to have to work again. I mean, they just literally wouldn't have to go to work. And I think I wrote a chapter in a book about this once, about an entire tier of sort of middle-class kids who are going to be finding themselves in a position where they'll be left not one. We once interviewed, this is absolutely true, we once had a guy call into a radio show I was doing, and he was, through a long line of issues in his family, he was the only recipient of both sets of grandparents' wills and his parents. And he ended up at about the age of 32 with, he didn't tell us the amount, but a ridiculous amount of money, like retirement money at that age. He didn't have to work again. He said he'd rather he had his parents back and his grandparents, but nonetheless, that's the position he was in. Similarly with Lawnmower Boy, who, by the way, I'm suggesting has worked hard all his life. Might have been a bank robber, I've got no idea. Could have been bone idle, who knows? But let's assume he did work all his life. He may be property and asset rich. He might have nothing else.
Well...
So what happens there? You're going to come along and say, give us your money and your lawnmower.
Well, no, I'd say he's got a choice. He can downsize. If he's living beyond his means, all of us have to make a decision. I've talked about the state living beyond their means and taking some cuts to repair that. If somebody is asset rich and cash poor and they can't afford their lifestyle, then they are going to have to draw on their assets to help out. And it's probably likely that Mr. Lawnmower doesn't have a mortgage and could downsize and get quite plentiful equity gains on that. So just another thing I would mention, which is millennials, and I'm a millennial, I'm a mid to older millennial, have moaned quite a lot about their circumstances. And because it has been a tough labour market post-financial crisis, wages have been stagnant, house prices have gone through the roof. But eventually they will be quite a lucky generation because they are the children of baby boomers and they're likely to, in this great transfer of wealth, to inherit huge amounts of money. Not everybody, but a good chunk of people. Now, lots of people complain about inheritance tax, and I don't want inheritance tax to be 100%. I think it should be at proportionate level. But a lot of people complain about it and saying it's double taxation. Well, every time you and I go to the shop and pay VAT, we've already paid income tax, national insurance, and now we've got to pay VAT. So it's actually, for workers, that's a triple tax. Someone who receives inheritance, it actually isn't double taxation. They haven't been taxed on that already. That's the first time it's being taxed. So
they haven't, but the money has, right?
Well, someone who's died cannot be taxed.
No, that's
the
true.
Recipient is taxed.
I've got a feeling the Green Party will probably try that, though.
The Green Party might
tax the dead,
but they'll also say we should be whacking up taxes on higher earners.
Of course
and I think we shouldn't be doing that because people who are working incredibly hard, who are young to midlife, trying to start a family, raise a family, the tax burden is too high on those people. We need to reduce it.
What about, just a final point then, back to Lawnmower Boy. So he's got his house, and I said that he probably bought it for 30 quid. Maybe he didn't buy it at all. Maybe he was left his house by his nan, and there's a very sad story there that it's the family house. You know, his nan was bombed out of her shoes during the war, and his granddad never made it back. His parents were kidnapped, I don't know, during the whatever happened. So it's his house. Why would he be made to sell his house?
Well,
they're going to be the arguments, aren't they?
But we have to...
He likes living there. It's not a mansion, by the way. It doesn't take much to have a £2 million house these days.
Well, in the south and London,
I know that
agree.
Sounds casual to say that, but it's quite surprising.
I know what you mean.
What it does when you look at it in my head as a kid growing up in a working class background, a £2 million house is essentially a mansion. Today, it's not.
And I grew up in an ex-mining village, and that is a hell of a lot of money. But I agree, particularly in London and some areas of the southeast, it isn't that much money. But, you know, if we're struggling financially, this is why we save, right? We make difficult choices. We have to say we're going to sacrifice X, Y and Z. And I'm afraid even if you've worked very hard and got a house, if you're living beyond your means, you have to make sacrifices. And I'm afraid that does mean that in some cases, some people will have to downsize. I'm not saying, you know, they don't have a house. They'll just have to go to a house which is much less expensive.
Sure.
And that's the choice they'll have to make. And some people say, well, stamp duty is deterring this downsizing. To which I say, well, imagine this Mr. Lawnmower, let's keep going back to him. You know, his house bought it for 35 quid back in the 50s. It's now worth, I don't know, 800k. He's got no mortgage on it. He downsizes to a property of, I don't know, 500, 600k, pays stamp duty of 15 to 20k. He's still getting, you know, over 200k in equity gains, minus the stamp duty.
Think of how many lawnmowers you could buy with that.
Exactly. He's still getting a large equity release from that, even though he's paying stamp duty. So, you know, I think it is the case if people are asset rich and cash poor, they need to make sacrifices, just as people who are living in poverty and are of working age have to make difficult decisions about their life and make sacrifices to make sure they're living within their means.
This story, and it's not for the first time, we're talking Bill Gates here, talking about the potential dangers of AI for society. Now, he's not the first person. There was that time when a lot of the AI head honchos said, oh, maybe we should put a pause on AI. Now, I think this story is as big as the story of Adam and Eve. I think it's biblical in terms of its size, and yet doesn't really get any traction. It sort of sits there on the tech pages. People like you and I talk about it. Lots of our listeners are interested. I mean, Bill Gates is saying that robots and AI should be banned from taking certain jobs. He's essentially saying, look, he can see mass layoffs because you've got machines and AI doing things better than humans. Now, we're already seeing what AI can do. How good, if that is the way to describe it, does AI have to get before people go, hang on a second? My example, by the way, Sean, sorry, this is a long question. Okay. My example I always give is, there's going to be a day when somebody's going to walk into work and they're going to say, oh, my brother-in-law got laid off on Friday, him and 10,000 others at the telecommunication company he works for. Oh, right, how many people work there? 10,000. So who works there now? No one.
Just a robot.
It's going to be a lonely robot. It's going to be a story like that. Then people are going to suddenly sit up, and there'll be almost a kind of a sort of a lockdown type moment where I think we're all going to go, what the hell is going on?
The AI one is so difficult because it's very difficult to pass exactly how good AI is, because you have lots of these tech sort of bigwigs who have big investments in these AI companies. And so it really is in their interest to big up even if it's potential dangers. I mean, we've seen lots of these sort of like crazy AI going rogue stories from OpenAI and Anthropic, and you think, oh, well, that's terrible press. But actually, that's great publicity for them, because when the AI is doing all this bad stuff, it's like, well, you need to invest in the AI so that you can have your own AI protections against the AIs going rogue. And so it's, you know, it's in their interest to publicise them, make them seem like, you know, this sort of doomsday technology. It's difficult. Will it replace everyone's jobs? There are lots of different conflicting opinions on this. You know, clearly AI is very good at sort of menial tasks. I think, you know, even though the models have developed significantly, they clearly still very much struggle with creativity, originality, doing anything novel in the way that humans are really good at doing novel. And of course, that's because they're trained on the stuff that we do, but they can only see stuff that we can do. They can't, you know, have these original thoughts. And so, you know, will it replace everyone's job? I don't know. I think certainly, you know, if I was working in a factory, you know, maybe I would be worried. But then I think people in factories have been worried for a long time because, you know, robotics have been replacing elements of, you know, sort of physical labour for a long time. I think actually this idea that it's going to replace a lot of creative jobs is probably overblown. I think it doesn't do creativity very well. And then I think the other part of it is I think people just don't want stuff made by AI. In the same that people don't want stuff that's, you know, cheaply made knockoff stuff. I think it's the same thing with AI. I think we're seeing a lot of social media companies having to label stuff as AI because people don't want to watch AI. I think if someone told you that they'd made a movie entirely with AI, I mean, I certainly wouldn't be really interested. I mean, maybe I'd be interested in watching the first one once because of the novelty of it, but then never again, I think.
So would there be a problem if, you know, every now and again somebody, I say every now and again, quite a lot on social media, there's a video up there and, you know, somebody tries to fact-check it, ask Grok, is it AI?
Which is just a nightmare.
Yeah,
Honestly, journalistically, it's a nightmare.
It is a nightmare because you can't always tell. So if the quality didn't look any different, but it was AI, but you knew it was AI, would the fact that you knew it was AI ruin your experience of watching it?
I think it would absolutely ruin it. And
so you knew there were
I'm
no
always
humans.
reminded of this chess, scenario where chess is like currently wildly popular, and computers have been able to beat chess for years, but people don't want to watch computers playing computers at chess. People want to watch humans playing chess because there's that. I suppose it's like F1 drivers. If you just replaced all the F1 drivers with robots, maybe they would be better. But who wants to watch robot F1? It doesn't have the drama of the driver relationships. So I just I think it puts people off. It puts me off, and
it's a bit like,
I don't think I'm alone.
So I haven't seen Odyssey yet. You may have done.
I haven't seen it yet. I want to watch it in IMAX, but you can't get tickets.
I know.
For
well,
it.
that's the thing. When you watch it, I like to think that Christopher Nolan, who directs it, and he's meant to be a bit of a tricky character to work with, but I don't really care about that.
He doesn't use phones, interestingly. He doesn't believe in smartphones.
That's interesting.
But then, he'll have people who do use smartphones
He's
around
got
him.
people who does. But, serious guy, when you watch it, subconsciously, you are aware that there's a director and there's a director of photography and there's a brilliant editor that has put all of this together, and they've done it with their own instinctive talents and a collaboration of ideas, and that, even though you're not overtly thinking it, I think informs your viewing experience throughout any kind, whether it's theatre, whether it's whatever. So for that to be absent would be massive, right?
Absolutely. I always think of, I have this painting in my house that is an oil painting of like a ship scene. It's like ships crashing on the waves, and it's lovely, it's beautiful. And I just think if a machine had printed that out, it would be nowhere near as valuable to me. But the fact that a man sat down and spent hours painting this, it adds value to it. So I think something that's handmade, it has that value that AI, I just don't think could compete with.
We've been talking about Meta this afternoon. They've been fined a paltry, and I use that word deliberately, $18 billion to settle this thing. Paltry because it's got to be paid over 10 years. Paltry because they're worth over $1 trillion. Paltry because they've probably currently got 18 billion in the bank, and if they put that in a savings account, they would get the money back to pay the fine. So at no level financially does this affect Meta, is my point.
It's basically a rounding error. And what I thought was actually particularly amusing about this is that they agreed to pay 12 billion, and then the other sort of 5.5 billion is contingent on TikTok and YouTube and Snapchat also doing the same things.
Yes.
So it's sort of a bribe to get the states to go after them as well. I think Meta probably feels like they've been unfairly targeted when, some of these other companies, operate in similar ways, they would say. And so I think it's funny that they've added that contingency to it. But you're right, last year I think they made about 200 billion in revenue. The company is worth 1.4 trillion. So I would really, even though it is a large settlement in terms of how far settlements go, because Meta generates so much money, it's quite small for them. But, it's certainly interesting. I think really no one ever expected the money to be truly enormous. The main thing is that they're going to make a bunch of changes to how Facebook and Instagram operate, specifically in terms of youth safety.
But even that's been criticised by some, saying actually they got off quite lightly here because there's loads of other things that they should have been forced to do and are doing none of it and not been asked to do anything.
And also what's particularly interesting is that this isn't the government cracking down on Meta. This is the very American story of you having to do it through lawyers in the courts.
Yes.
So it's a brilliant day to be a lawyer in America.
Well, of course, lots of documentaries and films have been made on things like Facebook. There was The Social Dilemma, which, of course, was the documentary where a lot of their former employees were talking about working in social media and some of the little tricks they get up to. The fella that came up with the like button. You remember that guy on there? I thought that's something no one's ever going to take away from you.
They used to do poking as well. You can't poke anymore.
You could poke somebody. Do you remember that?
Back in the day, you could
poking on Facebook. A lot of poking going on.
I don't think it should have survived.
Can you still say your relationship status is complicated on Facebook?
Yes.
I probably can. We can all probably say that. And then there was The Social Network, which was the film, wasn't it?
Yes, Jesse Eisenberg, which was actually very popular, and now they're making a new one.
There's a sequel to this. So is this strictly all about Facebook?
Yeah, it is. It's called The Social Reckoning. It's out in October, and this is about the big leaks that happened back in 2021 when that whistleblower basically revealed a load of documents that showed that Facebook knew that maybe it was doing things in a harmful way, but decided that actually profit is wonderful and we would like to have more profit. And so they're basically doing that. Jeremy Strong, who is in Succession, you know, played Kendall Roy very well. He is playing Mark Zuckerberg, and actually he does such a good impression of Mark Zuckerberg. It's really impressive. Because Mark Zuckerberg is quite a very specific type of person, and he has a very specific way of speaking and cadence, and he really nails it, which is quite impressive. It's quite. I mean, if you close your eyes, you really do think you're listening to Mark Zuckerberg, which is very strange.
A lot of conspiracy theories about Mark Zuckerberg.
Oh, loads.
I mean, loads.
There's the whole lizard people thing.
But there's the lizard people thing. I mean, I just heard somebody say, and they said it so convincingly. You know, when somebody says something profound, but in a casual way, it becomes all the more profound and powerful because of the, you know, they haven't given you a warning, like a godlike sort of lecture. And I can't remember who said it, but he just, within the context of an interview or a discussion about this kind of thing, he said, if anyone seriously thinks that Mark Zuckerberg owns or started Facebook, then you're dumb. And I just thought, wow, he said that with absolute conviction, very precise and very calmly. So calmly, he frightened me.
Well, I mean, I suppose you could probably...
his overall arching point was, hang on, Facebook's much bigger than...
Yeah, I think you could make that argument.
Why is it that...
It's blown... It's grown so vast. And obviously in a way that Mark Zuckerberg, when he was sort of, you know, sitting in his Harvard dorm, could never have imagined. Because, you know, originally it started as a sort of way to just, like, you know, compare faces on the internet. And it was specifically for uni students. And, I mean, now look at it. I mean, they have Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. It's such a
But how many... You think about all the big things. How much more stuff could have been invented in a kid's garage in California rather than, hang on, you had, like, big things going on at the time. IBM existed. Where were they completely idle in this world of computer technology and progression and where it's going to go next? It seems that everything, whatever, and there's loads of other examples of that was all some, you know, it's just some darky kids. They were just messing around in their par's garage with the spanners and came up with MySpace.
And it's funny, isn't it? Because, like, in hindsight, it seems obvious. It seems like an obvious thing to create, but these things always do. But in the moment, I mean, even you think TikTok isn't that old, but it just came out of nowhere, and now it's one of the world's most popular apps. You just can't predict these. I mean, everyone thought the iPhone before that came out it was going to be rubbish, and then. Yeah, you know, look at it, just incredibly popular.
Well, that's beautifully leads us on to the iPhone, because...
That was a good segue, wasn't it? I didn't even mean to do that.
It was beautiful. Each one of our stories have completely related nicely, and you just took it right down that road with absolute smoothness. So the new iPhone is due out soon. We are talking... couple of weeks.
Yeah, September 9th. They sent out the invitations yesterday. It's all very exciting in tech circles. I'm personally very excited.
Are you going?
I love this. I'm going unless anything gets in my way.
So you're going to California?
I'm going to go to California.
You've been to a few of these.
I try to go every year.
Yeah.
I love touching the new phone before other people touch it. And then I come on things like this and I tell people about how it felt to touch the phone. And I have to find new creative ways to talk about how I touch the phone. So it's very exciting. Really looking forward to it. This year, specifically, it's meant to be the first foldable iPhone, which is very exciting because iPhones for a long time have looked mostly the same. I mean, they sort of, you know, tweak around the edges, but this is the first time where they're doing something really big.
Yeah.
You know, supposedly, obviously, Apple doesn't confirm any of this stuff in advance. We don't even get pre-briefings. Usually, with a lot of tech companies, they'll tell me about it in advance. I'll sign some documents. Oh, I can't talk about it.
Yeah.
Apple doesn't tell me a thing. I turn up and I have to scramble to write out what's going on.
They don't. Every now and again, there's these little sort of leaks, and there's a couple of characters over there in the valley who are, you know, known, who seem to be more reliable,
absolutely,
than others. Now, the smart money would say that obviously it's not a leak, you know, it's deliberately told to create just the right amount of innuendo and suggestion of what's happening.
Yes, and also, even if that wasn't happening, the supply chains for Apple are so vast. I mean, you've got to think they're manufacturing things in India and China, and so to try and keep all of this stuff under wraps is just impossible. And, you know,
if there is a folding iPhone, it's currently sitting in a box ready to be sold, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And it will have been, you know, will have been for weeks and months. They will have, you know, finalised the designs. They were working with people making the cases as well for the phones. So, you know, these things are very hard to keep under wraps. Stuff does leak out. I mean, we've been hearing about the foldable iPhone for years. As the Apple car is a great example, that was supposedly in development for about 10 years. I think they spent something like $10 billion on it, but they've never publicly confirmed that it happened. But, you know, there was lots of leaks and rumours about how they were testing it out in the desert, and yet it sort of just vanished without a trace.
It did vanish. I wonder what the story is there. My problem with the iPhone... You see, I'm an interesting Apple consumer in that I did read something in one of those leaks that they were talking about, you know, the new aperture capability of the camera. I'm thinking, get in the bin. I don't give a hoot. Cameras on phones, iPhone or Samsung, the result of taking a photograph on any of those phones ceased to be distinguishable to the human eye from computer like 10 models ago.
I would say, like, even, you know, longer than that. They've been so good. I mean,
been
really,
so good for
the differences you notice would be either like around zoom or how they perform, like in really low light. But generally, cameras have been really good for a long time.
But you know what it's like. We've both been to those when they take you in. You know, over here in London, you go to Apple HQ, and you go in, and they've because they do it. I mean, this is they're Apple for a reason. You know, they don't just go, oh, come and have a look at our phone. They've got a photographer there, right? And they've got models that have been bought into a thing. And this photographer, what you forget in that moment, because this guy goes, I'm just going to show you how to make it. It could be French, it could be American, it could be whatever. What you forget is, number one, he's one of the best photographers in the world, right? Who you just think this is some dude in trousers and a sweatshirt. He's been hired by Apple, and he takes a picture of a rose and you're watching it happen, and he shows you it, and you think, wow. And then I go into my garden when I get the phone and try to do the same thing. But he knows all the settings and everything. And this brings me to my wider point, is I don't need a phone for the music, I need a phone for an office, OK? I want it to do spreadsheets well. I want the calendar to be brilliant. I want the email function to be searchable. Searching for emails is a nightmare, as we all know.
Yes.
Why does it come up in that order? Why is
when you look for something on Gmail, it drives me mad.
The first thing it finds is something from 2018. It's like, no, why would you do that?
It's like it's designed to punish you, isn't it? It's I use Gmail all the time, but it is one of the worst things about it. It just has no idea how to surface the email that you want.
It is extraordinary.
And sometimes you'll type it, and then it'll show you it, but you've typed too much, and then you go back and it...
So my point, Sean, I have to be very brief on this, was that when I think about the folding phone, it could have everything I want on it, because it could be more... kind of obvious in terms of an office suite, spreadsheet, like I'm saying.
Oh, yeah, trying to use a spreadsheet on a tiny phone screen is very difficult. Foldable phones, you get that big inner tablet display, much better.
All the old expenses in there for the accountant, so it's done nicely for him, because I get rollicked every month. And
that's the thrilling life you lead, spreadsheets.
I know. I'm not worried about cameras. So all of that stuff and putting the show together and, you know, getting our ducks in a row, it could be good for me, but... I'm still not sold on the overarching concept of a folding phone.
You've got to get one into the hand, see how you feel. It'll be expensive. I think that's the thing that's going to put most... I think most people actually get on board with the idea of a foldable phone.
I think so.
A lot of money.